I think in athletics, the being vulnerable is a way of somebody getting an edge over you, right? And whether we are ever told that or not, I think unconsciously we realize that as soon as we show a bit of weakness, that's an end for somebody.
It's a stepping stone for somebody else to get ahead.
Absolutely.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to ALLSMITH. Man, today I'm excited for today's guest. I'm joined by Zack Parker. He's a former professional baseball player and the mind behind narrative recalibration. His journey is all about transforming challenges into opportunities and helping others rewrite their life stories. From his time on the field to his mission of empowering personal growth, he's got an incredible perspective that we're going to unpack today. Let's dive in. Zack, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. My new PR guy. I love it.
Dude, you have an incredible energy and aura about you. We connected at a leadership summit via Deuce Gym with a very special gentleman and close friend of both of ours, Logan Galbrick, who's been on the show a few times. And man, that dude is an artist with language. He's an artist with business. He's the founder of Deuce Gym there in Venice Beach. And something that's really cool to the human experience is like if you vulnerably go to a place seeking growth, information, and connection, you end up connecting with great people. And you and I were able to connect at that. And I appreciate you coming down to connect today.
Man, I could not be more excited. And I could not rave about Logan anymore. He's sort of the epicenter of interesting people, interesting things, interesting conversations. And I think you nailed it. Like
totally
being around him, being around that community, I always walk away feeling stronger, smarter, more curious than I did going in. Even if it's just grabbing a coffee with him. Totally. I walk away.
I love the word curious that comes there. And, you know, I think about that a lot, not just in the podcast space, but just in the life space around like, what are people thinking? Why do they do what they do? How'd they navigate from one chapter to the next? And I think it's incredibly important to be more interested than interesting. And then as a byproduct, you become more interesting because you're kind of Velcroing all these stories, experiences, and ideations as you kind of put one foot in front of the other on the human experience.
Well, we're limited, man. Like you are only going to get to experience the world through your experience, right? Mm-hmm. And to me, the curiosity is where it all begins. Like everything with narrative recalibration, every interesting thing we do, I think, starts with curiosity. And for you to want to reach out to people and be like, I want to learn more about the human experience through your experience, because no matter how hard you try, you're always going to be through the lens of Bryce. And I think
you're limited. And
I think you're right. I think the more curious and interested you're taking on other experiences, right? Mm-hmm. They're becoming a part of you in the slightest way, but you compound that with all the interesting people you talk to that you're actually engaging with and curious about, not just superficially, how's your day? What are you up to? But you walk away, like what I just said with Logan, you walk away changed by getting a sliver of somebody else's perspective. And I think it just all starts with curiosity.
Yeah, totally. I love your hat, by the way. For those of you watching, if you can't see his hat, it says experience over explanation. And I think that's so true. Like it's so easy for us to talk about things. They're cliche. They sound great on a podcast. We can use imagery and metaphorical analogies to create a tangible connection to experience. But there's something to be said versus if you and I met on a Zoom call versus going through something together where we're trying to tinker this next chapter. We're trying to figure out how to unlock reservoirs of potential based on the ideas that we've had from professional sports. And as Logan would say, what are the transferable skills into civilian life or into this next chapter? And I really do think like it's important to sign up, put it on a calendar, at least 2 events a year. And the reason why I say that is Tim Ferriss talks about this. And I think you'll really appreciate this, and it'll be a great umbrella for our conversation today. Let's say you and I are embarking on a trip to go to Machu Picchu, and we have an ayahuasca ideology that we want to go explore to, tap into ourselves, better get to know each other, adventure, explore. What do you think happens before that trip? Hey, Zach, like, what are you packing? Like, what are your thoughts about this? Like, are you a little worried? Have you been looking into things? Like, now in the 3 months before, we're connecting, we're exploring, we're a little anxious, we're a little uncomfortable, we're curious, we're playful. Then we go, we have the experience. And there's moments where like the travel sucks. I'm mad at you. You said this thing, the food sucks. We're like battling with each other over whatever disagreement. We have the experience. We powwow about it. We go see Machu Picchu. We do the fucking thing. Well, then what happens? On the other side of that, now there's 3 months of banter. Dude, you did this, and you did this, and you were wearing this, and the mosquito did that. And like, there's depth of connection. So it's like that one trip that may have been 7 days actually becomes almost 6 months. Sign up for the fucking trip.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this because I'm also saying it to myself, because I'm so guilty of like, I'm a new business owner. Let me start the business. Let me coach my clients. Let me do the thing. But it's like, you got to live. So when I say those things, like we were fortunate, like Logan was texting. I was like, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing in the business world. I'm signing up. I also want to support my friends. And there's going to be cool things in the lead up and the post. And it's like, this is an example of that, where it's like, this is the post.
Yeah.
I think you just got back from Ireland. Like all of that just feels so tangibly cool to me.
For sure. And you can't plan it. You can't predict it. There's no use trying. Like it's just going to be wasted energy. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I think this could send me on a tangent, but I think right now we have access to so much information. Our algorithms are so catered to us. And I think we take in these bite-sized bits of knowledge and we trick ourselves into thinking it's real and that we're learning or we're experiencing. So I'm trying to think of an example, but like many times I've gone down a rabbit hole on YouTube about how to do something. And after a couple hours, I'm like, okay, I know how to do that now. And then you go out and you try to do it and you're clueless. Mm-hmm. But I think the social media, just the internet, it's all playing tricks on our brain that we think because we're watching TED Talks and we're watching podcasts, and absolutely we can learn from watching and taking all that in. But again, man, going to a 3-hour leadership summit and talking to a handful of people, being open, being vulnerable, being willing to talk about the things that are scaring you, that are exciting you. I mean, that sends the energy out into the world that you have no idea how it's going to come back.
Totally, man. What comes to mind there is the ideation around words and actions. We can listen to words. We can absorb knowledge. We can be in a classroom setting and take notes. Way different taking that and creating some actionables.
Yeah.
Right? And like what I loved about that summit is like writing things down. Okay, Bryce, that's your idea. Cool. Everybody's sitting on the couch with the idea. How are you going to execute? How are you going to scale? How are you going to diffuse that into the world? How are you going to market? What's the terminology? What are you actually trying to do? It sounds good to you, but you're biased because you look at this thing and you massage it with your lenses and your ego every day. And what's the famous quote? Your level of success is directly correlated to the amount of truth that you're willing to accept.
Yeah.
Right? And you and I got to share some things. We got to share some things within our cohort of our table. And like, I have this thing, I'm full of piss and vinegar, and I share the idea, and I'm like, oh, I've got this refined. I've done this, I've trimmed the fat, I got it. And somebody's like, I don't get it.
One question will absolutely bring that tower down.
And I'm just like, fuck, you're totally right. Let me sit with this a little bit longer. Like, did you?
Or you're like, you don't know. And then somebody else is like, I don't get it either. And you're like, oh shit.
Yep.
Okay.
Back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
And it's just this tinkering, this trial, this error, this artistry. And I don't know, something to that felt really humbling, which may or may not be the right word. It felt really maybe demasculating. Like it felt like I had it all figured out. And then I came back being like, all it did was unlock more questions, which I think is the beauty of learning. You don't actually become a master. You enhance your ability to become a master in curiosity.
Yeah. I think there's a level of becoming humble in those situations, but also the understanding of like inclusion and understanding that, oh, we're all dealing with this at various parts of our journey of this idea. Like to walk in, and especially at Deuce, when again, there's, there's women, there's just straight businessmen, there's these huge bodybuilders, and it's like, oh, this shared experience. Like you walk away, even if you're having to recalibrate, regroup, whatever it is with your idea, I think knowing that like, oh, I'm not the only one. So like if you were to sit down with somebody one-on-one and they said, I don't get your idea, and you walk away, you're like, oh shit, like, is this even a good idea? But to see everybody stand up, pitch their idea, get cut down a little bit, I think it's like, okay, it's not just me. We're all in this together on our own journeys, but we're all dealing with this same translation from our idea to ideation.
Yeah, it creates a relatability, and similar to what Alex Hormozy talks about, he goes, pause for a second. Our world was created by people no smarter than you and I that smoked cigarettes that didn't have a fucking morning routine.
Or their morning routine was smoking cigarettes.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's like, all of the morning routines are great, the rituals, all those things. I have huge respect for them. I talk about them more than I probably should. However, that level of just like, okay, I'm not alone in this journey. The goal is to manage uncertainty, just keep going, put one foot in front of the other, learn that it's never going to feel like it's going to be okay, but it's going to be okay. Alan Watts talks about that. Oh,
love it.
Right? Yeah. And so, I don't know, there's something special to that. And when I think about Zack Parker, there's a quote that comes to mind. I think it's from Emerson. And he says, do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. And you carry an aura and a confidence about you. You dress well, but it's different. You roll up the bottoms, you're cut on the sleeves, you have a hat, you sometimes keep facial hair, sometimes a longer beard. It says a lot about you that, you care about fashion. You care about being a little bit against the grain. And I think in doing so, it shares a little bit of a bravery of like, I'm not trying to go the same way everybody else went. I did that. I played professional baseball. I did it at the highest possible level. Now I want to take some of the tools that allowed me to get there, and I want to give other people the advice that I also wish I was receiving at that time, which probably could have elongated my career, which is this concept of narrative recalibration, which is the story that is holding us back is the story that we tell ourselves. And I think there's so much to unpack there that I want to explore with you today. And I think, we'll talk about hypnosis, which gets a weird rep in the world, but all it is exactly your phrasing, narrative recalibration. There's different styles and techniques to do that. And so without further ado, man, let's define narrative recalibration for people, and let's unpack some of the cool things that you're doing.
I would love that, but I'm going to go back. When I graduated high school, no, it was when I signed my first, or my contract with the Rockies to go pro and leave school early. My grandma wrote me a note, and she just slipped it to me, and it was that Emerson quote.
Oh, interesting. Wow, the irony of that is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, you said it, and I was getting goosebumps.
Whoa,
because
I felt something there.
She wrote that, and we still are. She's still kicking. We just kind of kindred spirits. She's very artistic, but also very athletic, and we bonded over that. So that letter, meant everything. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Wow, that's cool.
But yeah, man, the narrative recalibration, it's one of those things that I talk about fondly as it's the accumulation of 40 years of failure. And I mean that, with pride, that it's taking all these moments and things that needed or I used to cope in the moment. And they were just these tiny coping mechanisms. But then over the long haul, you start seeing the consistency. And it's just this idea of that voice inside our head is not our friend, man. Mm-hmm. And I think when I finally realized that voice, even though it sounds just like us, it's got your voice, your inflection, mine has mine, that it's like, oh, that's not us. That is this Frankensteinian monster of every little micro moment of being judged or being criticized or even being protected. That, the time when your mom or your aunt or somebody said, no, don't do that. Like that'll be embarrassing. You're not good at that. Stick with this. Like those little micro traumas, like they compound to form this voice that is just trying to keep you down. And, it was this whole system that was kind of coming together, but it wasn't until the hypnosis stuff came in that it sort of fast tracked and brought it all together. This idea that we can access that voice, and through personifying it and dissociating from it and realizing that it's this thing that is trying to protect us. At the end of the day, it's this scared thing that just doesn't want us to leave the cave. It's like, hey, you're safe right now. Stay here. Let's stay in stasis and not venture out. Mm-hmm. And through, this narrative recalibration, you can learn to, on the fly in real time, have these conversations and sort of just put that voice to rest. Because I just think, to kind of sum it up a little bit, I spent my entire professional baseball career trying to destroy that voice, trying to, shaming myself, being in the middle of a game. Imagine being at the free throw line and that voice being like, oh, you're not going to make this. Like, who do you think you are? And instead of working through it, even if you just spend a percentage of your mental energy fighting it, like that's the percentage that keeps you from making it, being the hero and getting cut from the team. So I just vividly remember games, bases loaded, heat of the battle, and sort of being like, why the fuck, why? Like, why you? Why don't you believe in yourself? And just having this sort of ping pong conversation with that voice. And finally, I've gotten to a point where it's like that doesn't happen anymore. It's not an adversarial relationship. That voice still comes up, but now there's ways to just get past it and move on. And I think working with clients, you see it in everything. It's not, it's going to work. It's getting into shape. It's all these things. And we're all just battling. And I think so many people are so hard on themselves because they think, even if you don't think you're the only one, you're like, well, mine's different. Like, my voice is a bastard. And it's like, oh, they're all bastards.
Yeah.
And you can recalibrate that thing by understanding, like, look, that's not you. And I think separating yourself from that has been so huge for me. And it was the light bulb moment was the hypnosis past life stuff, where you can immediately be like, oh, and proof, like an experiential conversation with that thing. So you're not just talking to yourself that the voice isn't you. You're actually experiencing, you're feeling what it's like to be confronting this voice. And again, I can deep dive. You're gonna have to cut me off at some point, but some people, it's a monster, it's a troll. Some people it's a shadow or it's a smoke monster, but like everybody is able to personify this thing. And that's the experience over explanation thing. It's like experiencing a conversation with this voice in your head versus just trying to explain it away. It's night and day. And
I love the way you're talking about it, because it's creating a better association for me to understand where your headspace is. And also just imagine myself being at the mound where that voice comes in, and You know, you may have some tools in a professional setting where you're like, okay, I've come toe to toe with this voice before. I've sort of been here-ish. I've got these tools to acknowledge its existence and then cut the energetic cord and let it go. But it seems to keep coming back, which tells me that I've not fully healed from it or I've not fully understood it. And that means when you think of experience, I think of proof of concept, right? And that can go in a positive direction, spiral upwards, or that can also spiral downwards in the sense of, oh, that voice said I wasn't good enough. I threw that pitch. It was too far inside, and that batter hit a home run with the bases loaded, and I just gave up 4 runs, right? And then there's proof of concept of, hey, I acknowledge the existence of that voice. My catcher gave me this particular reading, and I disagreed. And I did my studying, and I understood that this batter wants this over this, so I'm going to screw with him, and I'm going to throw this pitch instead. And what comes to mind is there's a famous story that I listened to maybe, I don't know, a week or so ago about Greg Maddux. And I think you'll appreciate this. It was during the regular season. And they had done some film study on a particular batter, and they found that he likes pitches a little bit more inside. And so he throws the first 2 pitches outside, hits on the first, gets a strike, goes a little bit outside, gets a ball. And then his catcher gives him, I think, some sort of change up, and he says to put it outside. And he goes, and he wanted it to put it inside. He knew that batter wanted it inside, and he threw that pitch on purpose. The batter hit a home run. And the catcher later grabbed him after the inning was over, and he goes, "What the fuck, man? Like, I told you to throw it outside, and you chose to throw it inside. And he goes, "Trust me, we're going to meet them again in the playoffs. He's going to anticipate that I'm going to make that same mistake, and I'm going to listen to you next time. And when it matters in the playoffs, I'm going to throw outside, and he's going to be expecting it inside, and it's going to lead to a better season." And I was like, wow. That is the epitome of long-term gratification and narrative recalibration, right? Like in the moment, deconstructing, knowing that you're going to get ridiculed by the media, you're going to get fucking ripped by your teammates, your coaches, but it's the game within the game.
Yeah. I remember hearing that story when I was still playing. And I mean, the older I get, the more, you realize you don't know and how full of shit you were when you were younger. I remember hearing that and calling bullshit and thinking like, oh, that's just him justifying. And the older I get, the more I'm like, man, I wish I could have just taken that for what it was and taken that lesson instead of kind of calling bullshit. And there was another, Hank Aaron had a story like that where early in a game, he talked about how he would strike out on a curveball on purpose so that later in the game, the guy would throw it again and he would crush it. And I just remember thinking, man, that's not how it works. And I look back and I'm like, man, that version of myself was so close-minded, so arrogant. And I think, like we were talking about earlier, like curiosity and being humble and just understanding that like, maybe you don't know all. And like you said, being able to do that, being able to eat the shit right now, knowing that you'll be eating cake later.
Yeah, it's really hard to do. And one of my other favorite quotes that I talk about often, I think this relates to baseball a lot, is that everything that's measured doesn't always count, and everything that counts isn't always measured. Right? And like when you're so married to the game of trying to get victories and trying to win the World Series, you kind of let go of the immediacy of numbers. And, whether those stories are actually true or if they're romanticized, they're still really cool to think about as far as like, okay, I'm here in the now. What decisions can be made to positively impact the future? That leads to business, that leads to coaching, that leads to narrative recalibration. And so when we go back to that concept, like, where did that first align with you? Like, when did you start to get into your headspace a little bit? Did it start back in childhood, high school? Like, when did you start to tinker with that a little bit? Because I would argue in professional sports and a lot of my teammates, man, I was a deep thinker like you. I wanted to refine everything. I wanted to put in the time, energy, emotion, finances, whatever, to like get that 1% better. But there is also an argument that ignorance is a bliss. A lot of my teammates love to party and smoke weed and just, callous themselves, and then they would go out and they'd perform. So it's like, which recipe is better? I don't know.
It's the best recipe is that perfect mixture, because I know exactly what you're talking about. Some of the best players I ever played with, nothing going on upstairs, and it's what made them great. And anytime you try to sort of get in there and intellectualize it, I mean, maybe that goes back to experience over explanation. I remember guys going out and punching out the side, and they'd come in and it'd be like, dude, what were you thinking when you threw him that pitch? He's like, oh, I don't know. I just threw it. And I just remember thinking like the balls, like I wanted to make sure I was doing all that I could to succeed. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at.
It's Mark Manson, the subtle art of just not giving a fuck.
Dude, absolutely.
It's like no fucks given. And like literally when you have that level of courage and you're not seeking validation or a pat on the back from the world, you're just going out to just be unapologetically yourself. It sounds so cliche. It sounds great on a podcast. To actualize that, brutal. It's tough to do consistently. Yeah. And the guys that are able to just be like, hey, I just trusted my instinct and I just went with it, knowing that I would suffer the consequences, whatever they were, and then I would figure it out on the other side. That is confidence. And you do that time and time again, you develop a swagger, you develop a proof of concept that when you look over your shoulder, you're like, I am who I say I am. Fuck all the noise. I'm going to figure this out.
Yeah.
Free is the way to be. Life beats us up a bit and causes some bumps and bruises, but that doesn't mean we have to stay on the sidelines. This is why we've partnered with Kinyan Labs. Get back to doing what you love with this incredible portable device designed to get you back in the game. Kinyan is on a mission to move people from pain to possible with their top-rated red light therapy and laser solution, which tackles inflammation along with muscle and joint pain quickly and effectively. What I love is that it's portable and rechargeable, making it easy to actually incorporate into my everyday life consistently. It's small and lightweight, so you can throw it in your gym bag or work bag or even an overnighter. Kinyan's lasers and LED combo make this cutting-edge device extremely versatile for use with general aches and pains, as well as chronic back pain, arthritis, post-surgery recovery, endometriosis, and more. This has been an amazing tool keeping my elbows and knees pain-free for pressing, pulling, and squatting in the gym. Great tools like the Move Plus give me the freedom and flexibility to continue living life on my terms without limitations. There are a lot of reasons why over 15,000 people are using this device and rating it 4.7 stars and above. Head on over to kinyan.io and use code ALLSMITH at checkout to begin your pain-free journey.
And you know what that does is, even if you don't succeed, even if you go out there, you put your balls on the line, you do it your way, and you fail, you can live with that. Maybe the best piece of advice I ever got, I was going into AAA, spring training. I just was a AA all-star, like just feeling good. And this AAA coach who I'd never interacted with was like, hey, you can't pitch in AAA without a curveball. And I was like a slider, cutter, changeup guy. And so I was like, oh, okay. He's like, meet me early and we'll just throw a bunch of curveballs. So I'm sitting there, big league spring training, like trying to learn a curveball so that I could compete in AAA based on this guy who has no clue who I am. And I went out and I was shagging. And one of the like,
what does that mean, shagging?
Like BP.
Okay.
So the pitchers are just standing out, catching it, throwing it back in. Awful. I mean, you're not doing anything. It's the most mindless job ever. But a rookie ball coach came by and he said, hey, if the bus ever goes off the cliff, make sure you're the one driving. And he like slapped me on the butt and just walked off. And it wasn't until later that I kind of realized what that means. And I think about that all the time. It's like, if you're going to go down, for instance, if this podcast is going to fail, man, do it on your terms. Mm-hmm. Don't take advice from other podcasts, try to rip somebody else off and it not work. And then you're like, well, God damn, I didn't even want to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think about that all the time. This idea that, look, if this isn't going to go well, at least I'm going to be able to be the one that said I went out like the way I wanted to.
Yeah. The pain of suffering is way better than the pain of regret.
Oh my God.
Right.
That's the truth. Yeah.
And it's something that I think about often is just, I don't know, when you have this song inside, and my mom and I talked about this. So she passed away on July 23rd. I got to see her around the time when I met you. So that's actually part of the reason why I went up there, is I was like, my mom's was so tough that if I went up just to see her, she would have been like, I don't want to be a burden on your life. Like, go do your thing, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, oh, Mom, I signed up for this leadership summit. I'm going to go learn some business ideation as I, translate everything into ALLSMITH. And, I really want to spend some time with you. So it was a great excuse. It was a cool experience. And something about that conversation that she and I had, that she was just like, the graveyard is the richest place in the world. You go there and it's songs that were never sang, letters never written, books never written, love never professed, trips never taken. Out of what? Fear? Well, if it doesn't go right, at least you tried.
Yeah.
And I think there's something beautiful to the relationship of what I just shared in relation to what you said, where it's just, if you're going to go down, make sure that you're the one driving. That's cool, man. I like that a lot.
So when we met, I remember you talking about your mom, and I think that's where I saw past the exterior. Mm-hmm. You were telling me about her, and there was just a glint in your eye of love, and you were already, correct me if I'm wrong, but like starting to pre-mourn, knowing like this was coming and dealing with all that. And I could just tell how much you loved your mom. And, we're all narrative recalibrating all the time, whether we realize it or not. Mm-hmm. And don't want to flip the pod and interview you, but
totally,
you've had a couple transitions from pro basketball player to not, but then also, being a son and then losing, your mother, which I know was so impactful and hard. I'm sure it's something you will always deal with, but like, what has the last, year been like, or just how are you recalibrating yourself?
That's a great question. I think you can hear it in the pace at which I speak now. It's a lot slower. It's not always in a hurry. And I have a tattoo of a guardian angel on my arm, and she used to say, don't drive or live faster than your guardian angel can fly. And something that I love about just the last little bit is my father was supposed to live 4 months, but he ended up living 14. So we got time to connect with him and interview him and do all the things. My mom was supposed to live 12, but only lived 4. It happened so fast. And so the interesting component there is like, I never rushed the end. I was patient with her, and it helps you understand the concept of meet people where they're at. Everybody's operating based on the narrative that they know up until that point. They don't know what they don't know, like you said. And so navigation for me has been new. It's been explorative. It has moments of extreme sadness because you're like, whoa, both parents are gone now from cancer. I feel like an orphan. But then you also have this moment of like, whoa, I went through this experience that I don't think other people have gone through. So now I have tools that can potentially help and serve and love and support. So there's a lot of different elements to unpack it. I appreciate the question. It's a really good thing that I'd probably like to sit and journal with a little bit longer. But I think the loss of parents is different. And you sit with that in a unique way where the energy hits you in different ways. And I've said it on other podcasts before, but if you look at my fist, this would be the identity of trauma. And in the beginning, the jar that it's in is very small. It takes up a lot of your headspace, a lot of your energy and your emotion. And as you share the stories and as you gain tools in your toolbox, the jar gets a little bit bigger. The grief doesn't shrink. But like you create more space on your personal operating system to allow people in to share and to understand that like, hey, a part of you is missing, but that's okay. It's one of the things that makes you beautiful. And I think sharing that inevitably, and that's part of the ideation of ALLSMITH, we're either in adversity, just left it, or we're approaching it. And I think sharing that creates a relatability because it's going to happen to you if it hasn't already. It's going to happen to people listening to this, and it's going to happen to people that they love and care about, that it's going to continue to happen. It's part of the human experience. It doesn't feel good, but it teaches you so much, man.
Yeah. And I think it's so funny because it kind of goes back to experience over explanation, where it's like we all know that is literally the human experience, right? Mm-hmm. And
we try to avoid it so bad. Anti-aging everything.
But the experience of it, like no matter how much advice you give me and how much you tell me about your experience and how much you intellectualize it to me about losing a parent, it's going to be meaningless because
100%.
When I experience it, it's going to be overwhelming, and I'm going to feel like the only person it's ever happened to. And I'm going to walk through the world, and I know this. I know I'm going to walk through the world thinking, how are you at work today? My mom died. I'm lucky I still have my mom, but I know that it's going to really mess me up. Mm-hmm. But I can already picture wondering why airplanes are flying today. Like, why is everybody not sharing in this grief that I'm feeling? Mm-hmm. And even now, as I'm saying this and intellectualizing it, that experience I know is going to be one for the ages.
I'll share this with you, and I think it'll land, and I think it'll be great advice for people listening. Grief is misunderstood. It knocks on your door at the most inconvenient of times. It doesn't feel good. It is the most misunderstood concept on the world. Everybody wants to fix it. Life continues to move on. The world has an idea or a label as to how they've positioned you in their headspace of who Bryce is or who Zack is. And they want you to be that person because that's who they know. We're ever-changing creatures. We never stay the same. The only constant is impermanence. And what I've come to realize with grief is it's misunderstood and people don't know how to be. They want to be like, hey man, you're going through that thing. You want to go on a workout? You want to go hit a hike? You want to go do this? You want to go? And there are times that serves well because you're in a space of receiving and realizing like, oh, that's this person's way of showing love. But going back to narrative recalibration, most people want to be seen, heard, and understood in some capacity. If you can provide that, performance and yips probably decrease a little bit. But the moment you feel that level of doubt or that your contract's going to not be renewed or you're going to be let go, now all of a sudden it's like, that pitch is a little harder. That free throw's a little bit harder. And so the point that I'm making there is that I think one of the most beautiful things you can do in supporting somebody in grief or seeking support in grief is allow somebody to just be. And so what I do with friends that are navigating things now, I don't say, oh, I get it. I've been there before. I'm not the expert. But I can say, hey, I'm here. I'm happy to listen. And if you don't want to talk, that's okay too. If you want to listen to music that's cathartic and reminds you of them, if you want to go on an adventure, you don't have to say a word. I can just be there, and you can know that you're never alone. That can be a hug. That can be hand-holding. That can be sharing of energy. And I'll summarize it this way. I do not understand this, but there is something to the human experience that cannot be seen or heard, but must be felt. Those of you listening know what I'm talking about. There's something there. There's a reason why you and I feel gravitated towards each other. Where does my energy end and yours begin? You can't see it. And I tangibilize that thinking about the ripple effect. If I were to drop a pebble into water, you can see how the water diffuses with that energetic ripple. Energetically, I think it happens the same way, but we can't see it with the eye, so we don't believe it. But there's something there that I think you, of all people, can feel.
It's so funny to hear you articulate all these things, because it's these shared way of seeing the world. Like you're talking about with grief, this idea that people want to fight it or hide it. Like with me and the voice and helping people, it's the same way. It's like you can't win. You're not going to beat it. It's not something to beat. It's something that becomes a part of you that helps you evolve, recalibrate, and reframing these ideas in your head. Like I think the jar and the grief, like that's incredible. Like you're not trying to get it out of the jar, right? You understand, like, this is now a part of you. This is a scar. This is a sandbag you're carrying. And rather than trying to get rid of it, how are we going to move forward?
Let me ask you this. There's two guys sitting having these honest conversations with each other right now. Two former professional athletes, strong guys, played Division I sports. Good-looking dudes. Why is grief labeled as weakness? Right? You and I could go out and kick ass in a fitness gym right now. We could go on dates. We could carry ourselves well. We dress well. But it's like, it's not rewarded by being honest with yourself. It's almost weaponized in a sense of like, oh, you're too much. You're too deep. Or I'm not capable of handling that. And it does go back to the concept of like, people can only meet you as far as they've met themselves. But I want to make meeting yourself cool again. Yeah. And I'm curious, your thoughts in association with that, or if you've even experienced that, because I've experienced that a lot. People are like, whoa, I wasn't ready for that. And I'm like, dude, when you lose two parents, like you stop playing small. You just start playing big, and you start going below the surface. And it's like, I want real human connection and real experiences, because before we know it, we're going to do this and life's going to be over. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think in athletics, the being vulnerable is a way of somebody getting an edge over you. Right. And whether we are ever told that or not, I think unconsciously we realize that as soon as we show a bit of weakness, that's an end for somebody.
It's a stepping stone for somebody else to get ahead.
Absolutely. And so I think we're trained, and it's not just athletes. Like I think we're, I'm literally writing a pilot right now called How to Be a Man.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's this idea of the modern spectrum of masculinity is so wide. What does it mean? Where do you fall within that spectrum? But I think it's a foothold for somebody else to weaken you. And again, it's not explicit. I remember pitching and coming in, and like your teammates will play these sort of unconscious games with you where you might have pitched really well, but they'll say something like, "Were you feeling all right tonight?" It's like, "Yeah, I felt good." Okay, well, your fastball was down like a mile per hour, but like, good job. And
that's such a backhanded comment,
dude. It's those little things. It's sometimes it's somebody they are trying to sabotage, but it's looking around, and if somebody's in the training room too much, it's like, okay, Bryce, he's about to go down. Like, look at all the work he's getting done on his knee. And all these conversations are happening in our head. Like, you might not be talking to a teammate, but they're like, okay, we got a wounded soldier. Mm-hmm. Like, maybe that's my chance. And I think, look, I was the same way. I usually found one or two guys on every team that I really connected with, and we would go to coffee shops alone. Maybe instead of going to the bar one night a week, we would go to a coffee shop together and just talk about life, death, love, all the things, because it's so superficial. And again, it's this narrative of like, hey, I'm Zack Parker, I'm bulletproof. Like, you're not getting a leg up on me, and you saying the same thing. And we're too, like, what, peacocks, like going at each other, just trying to like stick up our feathers, instead of being like, hey, one of my feathers is fucked up. Can somebody help me with this? And I think it's important, man. I think it's important, especially when you transition out of that.
Yeah. I think in it makes sense. Like, it's difficult. I don't necessarily love it, but in it kind of makes sense of just like next man up. Most things are competition. We got to rise to the occasion, survival of the fittest, figure it out. That is, performance sports.
Yeah.
I don't always agree with it, but I get it conceptually. When you transition out of it, it's like, I don't really want to play that game anymore.
Yeah.
And I think there's a maturity that takes place where you kind of play the peacocking game a little bit post-career, and you're being measured based on a status, or, feeling like you're being judged or observed for whatever reason. Then you eventually get to the point where like the rules of the game have changed. I don't want to win anymore. I want to keep playing.
Yeah.
I want to keep playing as long as I can, so then I can do also transferable skills into all these other arenas, as opposed to just being a specialist in one.
Yeah. It's funny because when I see a modern peacock walking around, like, my instinct is to like, that dude needs a hug.
Yeah.
Like,
100%.
Hey bud, like, what's up? Let's talk.
Yeah.
Because it's from sports. It's that thing of like, okay, you're overcompensating for something. Let's talk about it. And I think being in a space, not feeling judged, and it's hard. It's hard these days. I think the perception is vulnerability, and there's so many buzzwords, authenticity, all these things, but I don't know if everybody's practicing that. Like, I write about this a lot, and to myself in my journal, and I struggled for a really long time with authenticity. Like, what does that mean? Like, I felt like I needed to plant a flag in who I am. This is who I am, and just carry that flag. And I didn't like that. I don't resonate with that. And
I don't either.
And I've sort of redefined it in my mind that, like, to be authentic is about being vulnerable in any moment, and just being able to, in that moment, this is where I'm at. This is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm doing. Because if you're lying to yourself, to anybody, like, you're being inauthentic.
Totally.
And I felt that pressure. And just a quick story. I remember in A-ball, one of my best friends on the team, this like super cool black outfielder guy, like so hip. And I walked in one day, and I can't remember what I was wearing, but he was like, ZP, man, what's up with you? He's like, 1 week you're a cowboy, another week you're a surfer, another week you're like, formal. And he was just busting my balls, but that kind of bothered me for a while. I was like, wait, who am I? Like, what does that even mean? And then it was over that course of really thinking through, and again, all these buzzwords of being authentic, living authentic, but it's like understanding what that really means. And it's like, this is where I'm at, man. I'm sad today. I don't know why, but there's something bubbling underneath that's, bothering me. And like, that's you being authentic.
Being honest and authentic. I appreciate you sharing that. And the other thing that comes to mind is, I don't know if it's ever really been highlighted or unpacked, but Bruce Lee talked about be water.
Oh, dude.
Right? And it's like,
amazing quote.
I think being authentic is recognizing that, like, if you go to the beach and look at the waves, not every wave is this boisterous 60-footer.
Yeah.
You get a big wave, you get a small wave, it's flat. Sometimes it's ebb and flow. Sometimes there's rip currents. Like, there's peaks, valleys, and everything in between. I think part of the human experience is recognizing that we are malleable creatures, and we do not actually have to be the same. And I think part of inauthenticity is actually being the same all the time, because you're acting if that's the case. Let's just use an example. I'll use a woman, for example. Every 3 or 4 weeks, 4 weeks, she's going through a menstrual cycle. She has a week of ovulating. She has a week of feeling really strong. And then she probably has a week being in between all of those things. Women have it tough. Their hormones are dancing nonstop. We think as guys that we have a closer relationship to some sort of homeostasis. But we're probably playing the same game in some capacity in relation to a hormone strategy. To expect you to be the same all the time is inauthentic and robotic, in my opinion. And the reason why it's that way is because our education system tells us, hey, Zach, if you remember these things and you categorize them appropriately, you're going to get a score on an exam. Based on that exam, I'm going to assign a score to you, and that's going to be how I validate you for this next thing in your career. Based on how fast you pitch and how many strikeouts you get, I'm going to assign a numerical value of stars to then see if you're going to be drafted to the next level or whatever your contract is, blah, blah, blah. I get it. There needs to be a standard. There needs to be a recording system. Numbers don't lie. Totally get it. But the numbers aren't everything. Draymond Green's a great example of that in the NBA, right? Like, the dude doesn't score a ton of points all the time. Sets great screens. He's there to protect his homies. He makes great passes. He does the intangibles, gets deflections, things that don't end up on a stat sheet. I don't believe that Steph Curry and Klay Thompson are those guys without Draymond. So it's like, I don't know, man. Like, I look at that comment, and I'm like, I actually think that's beautiful. I actually think it's a compliment now. At the time, I would have been bothered like you, but it's like, I think it's the fact that you are willing to show outwardly how you're feeling inwardly rather than masking it and hiding it. And I think there's a unique art to that.
I mean, I like to think of it like that. I'm an artist. Mm-hmm. And I say that a little tongue in cheek, but yeah, I mean, the instinct or the pressure to curate a self brand, right? I would much rather be somebody that's evolving and being water. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've got a whole, lifetime of friends that know me as Zach, the baseball player. Mm-hmm. And, we've maybe kept in touch, and now I'm doing the narrative recalibration and past life explorations and peak performance hypnosis. And these, they weren't there for the evolution. So in their mind, they're like, who in the hell are you? Mm-hmm. Like, why? Like,
he's got woo woo.
Yeah. Woo woo. Like, this is fake or whatever it is. And again, it's the narrative, dude. It's the narrative that they tell themselves about me. And that's fine. Like, it doesn't bother me, but it's interesting how we set those narratives for ourselves and other people, and they just stick.
It's the gamification of titles, right?
Yeah.
Who are you? What do you do? And what can you do for me? And because water you can't really grab, it's seemingly psychologically misunderstood. However, it's powerful. It's in most of our bodies. It's makes up most of the earth. And that's where I go back to that original concept of the Emerson quote. You're not afraid to go against the grain. You're not afraid to say, hey, don't go where the path may lead. That's what everybody else is doing. I want to explore some of the thought ideations and go where people haven't gone before. And I think it's brave, it's courageous, but let's unpack it a little bit. Like, where can people gain some knowledge about this, right? Like, we're understanding that it's a story. We're understanding the term hypnosis, but let's kind of unpack the actionables and what you play with your clients and with your personnel.
So, the lives I've lived, I like to think of this experience, the last, 40 some odd years. I've lived all these different lives, right? I was the new guy, the new hillbilly at school in Austin. I was the chubby, awkward middle school kid. So I've lived all these lives, and the most recent, besides baseball, has been storytelling, producing, writing, being creative. And to me, it's this combination of curiosity and creativity. So when I'm working with a client, it's all about listening to start off with. I want to hear how they talk about the world. I want to hear how they talk about themselves. And it's getting an understanding of what they want to change, what's bothering them. And it almost always stems from a narrative. And it's, oh, well, I want to write a book, but, you know, my family, we're not the creative type. Like, we're business people. Like, I hear that so much, people that want to be vulnerable creatively. But what I want to work with people, or what I work with people, is I get them to that state of what they're trying to deal with. What's the unreliable narrator in their head? And then we use hypnosis to tell and experience an experiential story. Like, I want people to feel it. It's tangible. So
when you say hypnosis, what does that look like for people that are listening or watching on YouTube? Like, how do they understand what that is?
So, you know, there's so many different forms, you know. I mean, hypnosis, like you said, is so misunderstood. You know, we're hypnotized watching a movie, like driving down the highway. Like, these are all forms of like mild hypnosis, but mine is very much sort of like a creative meditation. So it takes a little while to get down, but I want to tap in to the core of somebody's creativity and their subconscious, and let that blend together. And in doing so, and again, depending on what we're trying to do, I could work with you directly about getting you in a peak performance and dealing with the yips. And I can get you in a place where you are in a high pressure situation and you perform the way you want. And it's not just seeing it. It's focusing on, Bryce, I want you to feel the stickiness of your shoe on the court. I want you to feel the dimples of the ball. And it's about getting into your body and feeling these things and then executing them. And then when you come out of it, you almost see the immediacy of some weight lifted, because now you're like, you've tricked yourself into thinking you've done it before, because it's not just visualization, as great as visualization is, but you can get in those moments where, okay, I want you to imagine pulling your shorts up, you know, on your knees a little bit while you dribble, and all of these things. And it's incredible to watch, because if I say something about your foot, you know, gripping the court, I can see, you know, these micro movements of people feeling it. But sometimes people don't know what they're looking for. Like, hey, Zach, something's going on. I need a change, or I want a divorce. I don't know. I'm at this crossroads. And we can do a very general, creative, past life exploration, where I can take you to a place and have you tell a story. And the story could have nothing to do with this life, but you experience it and you come away with a lesson, because your body, your subconscious knows what you need. But we don't tap into it. We distract ourselves, right? Like, as soon as you feel uncomfortable in life, you know, 10 minutes alone, you want to grab that phone. But for instance, I'll give you an example that it's pretty on the nose, but I have a client. She had a successful business. She had done TED Talks, like really killing it. And then the pandemic came, her business failed, and no fault of her own, right? It was a pandemic sort of casualty. And I'm talking with her and she's just frozen. She doesn't know what to do. I want to start a business. Everybody thinks I'm this great business person, but like, it failed. I can't go through that again. And just, again, it was this narrative that she had rewritten in her head. We did a general past life exploration, and I get to the part of like, where are you? And she's describing being this young boy in a city. It's dark, it's raining, she's lost. And, you know, this 30, 40 minutes of a conversation of her describing the fear and watching her breathing change and these micro movements of being afraid. And throughout the journey, she ends up hiding behind a dumpster. And she's hiding. She's like, I think I need to go that way, but I'm scared. I'm just going to wait until the morning. And then there was a long pause. And she's like, somebody's coming for me. Somebody's behind me. And then, you know, a few moments later, and she's like, he got me. He stabbed me. And I'm laying there and I'm bleeding. And then she described, you know, leaving that life. And but we come out of it, and it's this she comes out like completely, you know, blown away. She's like, I could feel, you know, I felt it in my back when it stabbed me. Like, you know, it doesn't hurt, but you have that sensation. But to me, we talked about immediately after was like the direct correlation between that life of you as a 8-year-old boy in the 20s in a big city. The lesson I took away from that was, if you freeze, if you through inaction, you die. And the next day she filed for an LLC. She's absolutely killing it. And it's not that I told her, hey, if you freeze, if you don't make a decision, you die. It was this experience of like deep down this lesson of like, okay, I need to get up and go, because I remember not doing anything and it did not go well.
No, it's very well said. I really appreciate you sharing that story, because I could feel it. And I think what's so interesting is, the body keeps the score, right? Like there's this internal whisper that's not always in the form of pain. Sometimes we have to become so intuitive to understand where's our internal compass pointing and why. How do we better understand that? And we have our own biases, our own traumas, our own things that we struggle with. And sometimes it takes a third party like yourself to be like, hey, there's some seaweed or there's some muck over some of these stories. Let's like clear that out by simply noticing. And I think that's what's great about what you're doing, is you're not necessarily telling somebody what to do or what to think. Maybe you guys are playing ping pong with some sharing of experiences, but then you're like, hey, how's your shoe gripping the ground? And like you're taking them out of their mind and into their body. You're allowing them to feel. And and it takes away the intellectualizing, but it also allows it a space. It's not removing it 100%. And it's a very interesting concept for me, because I think what's coming to mind, Zach, is the concept of ratios. If you get so into your head, it becomes paralysis by analysis. If you get so into your feels, you're an emotional wreck and you're not navigating that with the flavor of logic. It needs to be this unique bouncing back and forth that probably puts us in some proximity of flow state in order to maximize performance and live a beautiful life. But sometimes we taste flow. We expect to get back there the same way we got back there the first time. It's very difficult to duplicate. And so I'm curious, like as you navigate some of these deep, meaningful conversations, you're helping people get out of their mind and into their body. You're helping them notice. Maybe you're doing a ground to head, just noticing of the body in relation to maybe external objects, like you said, for me, pulling the shorts up while dribbling the ball. How do you create buy-in with clients around this strategy is going to help you move the needle in the right direction without having some sort of like roadblock?
Well, the first level of working with somebody is what you and I are doing, or when we first met. Like I can tell pretty quickly if somebody is, to sound woo-woo, has like a channel, an open channel, that wants to change, that is willing to do the work, to be curious, to have a experience. And so if there's not if there's not an initial vibe check buy-in, then it's not going to work.
Do you jump immediately to that conclusion? Like, because there could be two sides of that coin, right? Like, hey, if there's not buy-in originally and there's not a channel and they're kind of stiff-arming you a little bit, but you have this, knowing you so far, you have this internal optimism of like, oh, if I just show them this, maybe they'll come around. Or, you know, hey, when they were speaking that way, I felt their childlike mindset come out for a second. Like, I know it's in there. How do I artistically navigate some of the roadblocks that are in the way and go over, under, or around to help them see what I see so we can guide them?
So I have to fight that instinct a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you have too in your coaching, where it's
so
like
hard. You fall in love with the potential, man.
You see it, man. You know that it's just a tiny.
It's hard in dating too. You like meet people and you're like, whoa, you have so many great characteristics, and then you like are trying to go back to the potential, and it's like, that's tough.
You know, everything we're talking about, it always comes back to narrative and the stories we're telling, right? Mm-hmm. You meet somebody, you have a great date, you both go home that night and you lay in bed and you are creating a story about that person.
Yep.
And you have no clue if it's accurate. Mm-hmm. And that is what we've needed to survive as a species, but it's also what gets us in so much trouble, man.
Yeah.
And I think if I'm with somebody and it's very much, I mean, going back to sort of the simplest form, hypnosis is all self-hypnosis. Like I can't affect any change on you if you're actively fighting this thing. Mm-hmm. So if I snuff that out at all, then it's just, you know, come back when you really are ready to change or to have an experience. But
do you ever say something like, hey, what you're doing isn't working. You ended up here for a reason. And even if you do absolutely nothing with me today, or you take nothing with you, at the very least, I'm going to provide you with a thought experiment, a moment in time when you're away from your phone, and you're going to be breathing, and I'm going to give you a certain level of instruction where even if there's not reward, it's better than all the other things that they're doing.
Yeah.
So it is a gentle step in the right direction. Do you ever kind of tinker with that of like something is better than nothing, or do you kind of just feel that energy and you're like, okay, it's not the right fit. Let's explore this at the right time.
I combat that a lot in group sessions. So I lead group sessions in Malibu at Veritas Yoga, this amazing little independently owned yoga studio.
Very cool.
And that's with the group session, it's all internal. I'm leading you and I'm guiding you, but it's very general. You know, I can't get into specifics because I don't know what you're experiencing. And even if somebody, worst case scenario, they come out and they're like, wow, like, they're like, maybe I didn't see a lot, but like, I feel lighter. Yeah. Like the breathing is better. So, I mean, you're right. There's really is no downside to it. But when I guess the best way to say it is when I'm vibe checking somebody, it's like, where is their curiosity? Mm-hmm. Is their curiosity about like, I just don't think I can be hypnotized. You know, if they're just actively fighting me, it's mm-hmm. like, you know, we can do this, but you know, if you really want to get the most out of this, I need you to quit squeezing so hard, mm-hmm. quit trying to make it happen and just allow it to happen. Mm-hmm. But I think
what comes to mind there is if you and I try to grab sand like this, we're not going to hold very much because we're holding on too tight and there's not space. But when you open up your hands and you pick up sand, now you can hold quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so it's like loosening our tight grip on things. But I don't know, what I struggle with and what I'm exploring mentally with you right now is it sounds like you have a very strong-willed ability to walk away when it doesn't feel right. And I have a stubborn mentality of like, you don't think this is right, but I think it is.
But like I said, I fight that, man.
Yeah. And there's value to both.
Yeah. You know, when I was first getting entertainment, you know, I would hire interns or assistants wherever I was. And when they let me down, they were like dead to me.
Yeah.
You know, they come in making all these promises, and it's something I really have to allow people to have their own journey. Mm-hmm. Like if they're not ready, I can't force them. But man, really it's, if I could take everything I've been sort of talking about and really pare it down to what I think the ultimate value of the hypnosis and narrative recalibration is this. We're touching the stove, right? I can sit here and I can tell you, hey, you are a successful businesswoman. Do it again. Like you're creating a story in your head that you're not, but go out and do it again. And I could tell you to go home, repeat that in the mirror 100 times a day. And there's value to that. Like I'm not, discounting that. But if I can take you on a journey for 90 minutes to where you come out and you have felt that in your body, I like to think of it as touching the stove. Because if you have a kid and you're like, hey, don't touch the stove, what does that mean? It's meaningless. They're just words if you're a kid. But that first time you touch the stove, I get it now. Okay, I had an experience, right? I felt it. It hurt. I'm not going to do that again. And it's really hard to articulate until you've tried it. But I mean, literally these experiences with people that I have, these get embedded as experiences and not dreams. Mm-hmm. So another quick little story is the very first experience I had that really kind of changed everything for me. I was a mother in the 30s, and I was frantic, and I was having to give my kids over to protect them. Mm. But later on in that,
it's almost like Cinderella Man.
Oh, dude, so later in that journey, that life, I was describing walking, and I was like, the tile is cold and it's sticky. It's sticky from all the dried blood. So I have the audio of me saying that from that experience years ago. And now every time, if I'm walking outside and I step on, dried Coke, somebody spilled something, and I feel that stickiness on my feet, it immediately goes back to, oh, this is like that time with the dried blood. And it's not traumatic. I don't go back to that emotional state, but it's embedded in me. Mm-hmm. And so if you have that experience, again, if you're that client of mine who starts doubting herself in the middle of a work day when she's trying to build a business, you can literally close your eyes and think back about dying in that alleyway and just remembering okay, I got to push forward, because if I just stay here, metaphorical death of my dream, death of whatever it is.
I love that we're having this conversation, because you're adding tools to people's toolbox, but it's almost ingraining it into their unconscious competence and their ability to access these tools when they need them most, without them really realizing what they're doing, because it's not seen. Like, you go work out at the gym, you're consistent, you see muscles develop, you see strength, you see power, you see fat go away, especially when you're eating, sleeping, all the things. You don't always see when you psychologically deal with stressors in a better way. You can notice, but sometimes that needs to be prompted through a guided meditation or a hypnosis or through a third party that maybe is like, hey, your energy feels better. Like, you feel like you're less stressed. You're navigating these things in a much better and more efficient way. I see you. That's really cool. But most people aren't willing to say those things. It feels weird to even say it out loud, because it's things that I think, but I don't know that it's very common, or not a practice that's commonly used to be like, hey, I see that you're dealing with stress in a much better way. I love that you are recognizing this, and you've been very persistent in keeping your finger on that pulse, because it seemingly from the outside feels misunderstood. But as you contextualize it, I'm hoping this conversation and follow-up conversations that we have start to allow it to float to the surface and add some color, where people are like, oh, I get this now.
That's the goal. That's why I'm always trying to be vulnerable in that authentic way, because a lot of people I work with are coming from sort of the woo-woo side of things. Mm-hmm. And I've done group sessions before at kind of woo-woo type events. But dude, I'm in my Vans or my hat or a pearl snap because I want people to understand that, like, look, I'm not here, snake oil salesman.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm the last person that ever thought I would be doing this or believe in this as much as I do.
Give the tools that you needed.
Yeah.
You were at the peak of your performance.
My God, man. If I had this back then, it would have been, youth is wasted on the young, but it would have been an absolute game changer. I mean, it is a game changer. It's a game changer right now in my life without even having to be a high performance athlete. Mm-hmm. And I just think the ways it can help the whole swath, like there's nobody that this can't help
100%
on some level. And I just think that I want to show up and when I tell my story, I want people to know that, like, look, anybody that tells me they're skeptical, like, nobody was as skeptical as I was.
Yeah.
But what led me to do my first experience was the curiosity.
Yeah.
I don't believe in this, but I'm curious. And now my whole outlook on life is different.
The Trident family taught me something really important this last year, that we are all a bundle of stories, both good, bad, and everything in between. All of their cold brews remind their customers that they are part of something bigger than themselves. I start my day with the Sweet Cream Cold Brew as I am prepping my mind and body for fitness, service, coaching, and podcasting. With various locations in San Diego, they offer over 14 nitro cold brews and a variety of specialty drinks. You can find the perfect brew and pair it with one of their treats from the Keto Bakery. You can check them out over at tridentcoffee.com and use code ALLSMITH to take your coffee experience to the next level.
Which is why it's so important to experience things. I want to share this quote with you. That's something that came to mind for me that I wrote down here, and that is, the greatest discovery of all time is that a person can change from his future by merely changing his story. Right? And it's like, people allow their story to become so believable, almost as if it's like tattooed on their heart and soul. But I think if you can use the story, you go two different ways. Andrew Huberman talks about this. If you use your story to self-sabotage and go down this path, okay, there's winners and there's losers. So you're going to be a loser. If you use your story to love, motivate, and inspire and go down this path, now you have the opportunity to become a winner. And I think that summarizes it very well for the human mind that wants to, like, label things as this or that. You and I can get into, the gray area of that conversation, but I do think it's pretty cool to recognize, is this story serving me or is it not? Maybe it did, but it no longer is. Let's draw a line in the sand and let's either reframe it or let's let it go. How do you kind of navigate some of that with your teachings to better understand people, but also let them know that your story does not define you? It's a part of who you were at one point in time, and it's helped shape and form parts of who you are. But you're not a baseball player. You're Zach. There's a big difference there, and I think meeting people where they're at and treating them as a human as opposed to the label of what they do in the world some of the time is a better construct.
Oh, yeah. And it's something I struggled with after baseball. It's just like, and with baseball, I think is kind of unique in a baseball player is the first thing you identify as a boy, usually, right? I was talking to your producer earlier about, you want to be a fireman, an astronaut, a baseball player, but you're not a fireman or an astronaut when you're 5. But if you're 5 years old and your parents are like, that's Zach, he's our ball player. And then that's your identity until you're 30. It's like, oh shit. Like, who am I without, baseball player tag to me?
100%. And especially this time of year around the holidays, like you go to like mutual gatherings and all the things. And for 30 years it was, hey man, how's baseball going? Or, hey, I saw you on ESPN, or I saw you on the local newspaper, or I saw, social media. Great job, man. You get all this love and validation for that. Yeah. And then that goes away and the conversation becomes, oh, I'm sorry it didn't work out. It's like a sympathy card for a little bit. And then it eventually gets to a judgment card of like, who are you? What do you do now? You were this thing and you're not that thing anymore. So I don't really know where to like place you in my head. And then based on your answer, people then determine how much money you make and then where they want to label you as far as the amount of respect that they want to give you, which is just comedic to me and so silly. Yeah. And not everybody does that, of course. But to me, it's kind of like you're a human being that's helping people.
But on some level, even people that aren't doing it explicitly, we're always categorizing, right? Like there's somewhere in the subconscious, you're getting your story is being told by that person about you without your consent in a way.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson talks about that. He's like, inevitably, if you get multiple humans in an elevator, let's just say there's 7 people in an elevator, every person's kind of looking around, like creating a hierarchy. How's that person stand? I'm taller than them. I look like I make more money than that person. Oh, his energy sucks. That guy doesn't know how to breathe. His posture is off. This, that. There's all this judgment, and it becomes this hierarchy of comparison as opposed to we're all sharing this space. Kind of cool that we're going up to this floor and down to that floor, like whatever. Like, it's just so fascinating to me how humans are wired.
So, man, these things you're talking about are so vital to narrative recalibration because, again, so many people have these thoughts and they recognize them and they get mad. Like, why do I go there? Why am I judging that person immediately? And it's always talking about the awareness of like, look, your first thought in any situation is not your fault, but your second thought is.
Ooh.
Your response to that. So I do that all the time, and I'm driving and somebody cuts me off and I call them something. And my next thought is like, dude, don't. Like they're going to, their cat got out. They're going to their house to find their cat. Like whatever that story is, I need to tell to calm myself.
Seeking to understand.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And, you said we kind of moved off of it, but the power of telling your story, the Huberman quote, what I like to break down with people is something they want to do, something they want to change, and then like, okay, but what's your reason why you haven't or you can't? And then somebody gives their reason, and almost always, before we even say, how do we fix that? It's like, hold on, where's that come from? Like, you wouldn't say that to yourself. Like, you might be hearing that sentence, that phrase, you're not smart enough, you're not creative enough, whatever it is. But let's take that back a little bit. Tell me about middle school. I mean, middle school sucks, dude. Like, so many people get fucked up in middle school. But it's going, you go
puberty,
back,
baby.
Yeah. And you go back and it's like, again, I love my mom more than anything. But the way she saw the world has affected me. And so when I get in those moments of self-doubt or self-sabotage, potentially, I have to stop, and it's instantaneous, but I have to stop and remember like, nope, that's not you talking. That's mom. And it's, and then if you logically take it back and it's like, but it's not mom's fault. It was her mom criticizing her. Like, you can take it back as far as you want, but understanding that like, no, this is sort of an inherited trauma, this voice, you understand that like, okay, thanks mom, but I've got this. And then you kind of carry on. And again, it's like, if your focus is to kill that voice, you're going to beat your head against the wall for the rest of your life. It's understanding that like, I want to run a marathon. Like, who do you think you are? And it's like, wait, that's not me. Like, I just said I wanted to. That voice that's telling me I can't is, the manifestation of my negative voice in my head is Marshall. And he was this middle school bully. And so when I start hearing that voice or things start getting heavy in my mind, it's like, okay, Marshall, I appreciate you coming today, but like, you need to go to bed, go play video games or something. But if I tried to fight it, he's like a petulant child, man. He gets louder and louder. And that was what I was fighting when I was playing baseball. Instead of just being like, okay, Marshall, like, now's not the time. Go to your room and then get back into it like I can do now. And it's finding that for people.
I think it's really smart and really healthy to assign a name to the voice. I think it's important to assign maybe some characteristics to it and be able to steer it in a different direction.
Yeah. And become friends with it in a way. Like, maybe not friends, but not enemies.
Yeah.
Like whatever, even if it's.
Yeah, you did say that. I read that the other day. You've had that on your Instagram. It's the voice in your head is not your friend, but it doesn't have to be your enemy.
Yeah.
I love that.
Like, me and Marshall don't need to go get beers together at the bar, but I'm not going to let this personification of a 12-year-old bother me now as a full-grown man.
Totally.
And I just, beyond these steps of like curiosity, creativity, empathy, man, when I was kind of learning how to wrap my own brain around recalibrating myself, I just would think back at this Marshall character in my head and be like, you fucking prick. Like, why? And then I sort of do these like quiet meditations in my head, these creative meditations where I imagine Marshall taking the bus home, walking into a home, nobody's there. His dad comes home drunk and he's just this scared, and it recontextualizes everything. Mm-hmm. So now when I hear that voice that's trying to bully me, I know he's a product of his negative. Mm-hmm. And we could have a whole podcast just on empathy, but mm-hmm. to me, tapping into that voice in your head and giving it empathy, like it does wonders.
It's really cool. I like the way you said that a lot, just because so many people just jump straight to judgment. Oh, you were a few seconds late starting your gas at the red light, or, you didn't signal this, you cut me off there. But they're not understanding maybe the why, the how, and it may not have anything to do with the immediacy of everything. It could be a delayed onset effect from some other trauma. But then also being able to notice and recognize when things are not okay. And rather than like drawing a boundary with anger or resentment, having an honest conversation to then create expectations moving forward, typically in like a family or business relationship, obviously not a random.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting construct that you're able to jump into what we discussed at the Leadership Summit, which is those 5 perceptual positions, right? Like there's me looking at you, there's you looking at me. Super simple. But then there's me in your head as you looking at me. There's me in your head as me looking at me. And then there's the bird that's watching both of us.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting when you can tinker with that, like perspective really does become everything, because you can better understand, okay, anger is like holding on to a hot piece of coal. I'm the one that gets burned. This person made a poor choice and they didn't adapt appropriately, but me getting upset with them does absolutely nothing for any of us. It doesn't move the needle in the right direction. We may need a temporary outlet. We can use that famous Navy SEAL 5x5 rule. If it's not going to matter in 5 years, don't spend more than 5 minutes being upset with it.
Yeah.
So it's like, have your moment, be a human, flip out for a second, obviously not destructive or harmful. And then it's like, cool, let's move on.
Yeah.
And I think if you uniquely give people the tools to navigate their stories and better understand them and create better understanding of themselves and others, they can hold on and let go appropriately. And then the sled that they are carrying, if they are carrying a sled or pulling a sled, is the weight that they choose to carry, as opposed to miscellaneous traumas that can make for pain, biomechanical issues, all kinds of a slower trudgery, and doesn't allow you to operate the human experience the way you really want to.
Man, the perspective thing is huge. And I think, when you're talking about at a red light, somebody honking, somebody, whatever, to me, those sort of the people that really can't handle those emotions, like there's something inside of them that's always seemingly boiling, like ready to boil over. Mm-hmm. And I love
hanging out on the edge.
I love working with those people, because when you really dig deep and then, use hypnosis, a lot of times it's like you take all that back, and it's because when they went to college, they got into architecture because that's what their dad wanted, but they wanted to be a writer. And it's like these things that have happened to us, they just are bubbling right underneath the surface, and we don't understand why. And they come out in all these crazy ways, destructive behaviors, overeating, stress, anger, sadness, like whatever it is. But you can, again, man, I've had so many experiences with clients where you take them back and you give them a different perspective. Right. And Logan uses that, but I always go back to this book, The Inner Game of Tennis, with Tim Galway. He wrote in the 70s. It's just so profound, man. But he talks about a tennis match. So you have a shot down the line and it goes out. So one guy is pissed. It's a bad shot. The guy that he's playing against is like, oh, good, great shot. And then you have the umpire who, it's just a shot to him. It's out. It's not good. It's not bad. And then you have the crowd of people that are responding to it emotionally based on who they're supporting. And it's like, in all these situations, how can we, maybe it's beneficial for us to experience our side of it, and then the other side, and then the third party that's not there to judge at all. And I don't want to completely get into all the system and stuff, but like, I have this thing I work with clients early on, and I call it unabashed transparency. And it's like, you have to be willing to take a day, a week, however long you think you can maintain it. But I need you to watch and think everything you say or do in a day. And I need you to take all the judgment away from it. Like we got to figure out where you are. Your thoughts.
That's hard.
That's so hard. It's very hard, but it's what's the quote in fitness where it's like, if you can't, whatever, like if you can't make it a number, you can't make a change. Like if you're not tracking
if it's not measurable.
And that's the idea. And it's like, well, man, you're having a tough time in life right now. Like, let's figure out what you're thinking and what you're saying, and to yourself and to the world. And it's hard, man. And everything I talk to somebody about is some shit that I've dealt with. And so the story behind that is I came back from a AA season. I was struggling. I was hurt. And I put on a bunch of weight, dude. Just soft, bad weight. Came back to Austin, and somebody was like, man, you need to try Bikram yoga.
Oh, wow.
So I go to Bikram. Absolutely dominates me.
Bikram's tough, man.
No idea what I was getting into.
Yeah.
And I went to another class, and I'm in the back, and I'm hiding, and I'm like, I'm going to do it, but like, I don't like this. And then for whatever reason, the third class, I was like, fuck it. I'm getting in the front row, right in front of the mirror. I'm taking my shirt off. I'm pulling my shorts up, and I'm just going to sit with this for night, because those are 90-minute classes.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to sit with this and just deal with it. Yo, this is where you're at. You don't like it, and it does not make you happy. But I want you to sit here and look at the reality of the situation. And then doing that every day, you start seeing the results, and it snowballs and it compounds into getting to where you want to go. But if you're just sitting there hiding, you don't even know how well you're doing if you're in the back with an oversized shirt on trying to hide.
I love that, man.
And it's just, we got to be honest, man, especially mentally. You always talk about journaling, and the translation between those inner thoughts down to your hand, down to writing, like, it's so profound.
Yeah.
And so meaningful. And
it creates space and allows for us to close some of the tabs that are open. It allows us to create a visual analogy as to what's floating around in there. But the other thing that's important around what you discussed in relation to Bikram yoga is there's a level of acceptance and surrender, right? Like the ego's like, Bikram yoga, these people don't get paid to be here. They pay to come to the studio. I got paid to be an athlete, dog.
Yeah.
And like navigating that headspace is tough. That's a whole monster in and of itself, where your ego's just really putting up the Heisman Trophy stiff arm to that and just saying something along the lines of, do you know who I am? Do you know what I've done to get to this level? And then you go and you get your ass kicked at Bikram, and you're like, okay.
And you're a soccer mom.
Yeah.
You're kicking my ass.
Totally.
And yeah.
And my father went through it when he went to to the 12 steps, and he talked about he was a fighter. And as a professional athlete, you're a fighter. If I just put in more time, more work, I'm going to outlast the competition. I'm going to beat them. If I just get into the training room sooner, I'm going to get more rehab. I have all the resources. If I just eat better and sleep better, I'm going to elongate my career. All those things sound great, and they work until they don't work anymore. Self-reliance is everything. If I just do the thing, I'm going to get the thing. Life's not fair. It never was, and it's never going to be. And somewhere in the mix of all of that shit is this concept of surrender, is this concept of peace. And if we can lean into that a little bit, it allows for this narrative recalibration to really penetrate our headspace and meet us where we're at in the appropriate season of life. There are seasons where you need to fight. There are seasons we need to hustle and you got to grind. You got to wake up and work more hours than everybody else. There's also seasons to back off. Right? We can't be this all or nothing. We're not this or that. We are water. We're malleable. We're ever changing. We're peaks. We're valleys. We're everything in between. And we are a bundle of stories. And I think recognizing that not every story is going to be good. Not every story is going to feel good. But knowing that those stories are a part of us, that's where the beauty comes in. And being honest with that and sitting with that and sharing that vulnerably, whether you are a big, strong, masculine male or a very small human just trying to tiptoe around. Like wherever you are, be there and accept that.
That's really well put, Bryce. I love your ability to metabolize things and create like metaphors and analogies so quickly. So very impressive. You know, we started off talking about the energy that people share that you can't see. One of the most powerful places I've ever been, and I still go on occasion. I'm not religious about it. Al-Anon. I'm not an alcoholic, but I was, you know, my father and I wasn't sure what I was getting into. Mm-hmm. I pushed it back a long time. Like a lot of people complaining about their dads. Like I'm cool. I don't need that. Mm-hmm. But there's something energetically about being in a circle with people, completely vulnerable, without judgment. Nobody's there to fix you. People are there to listen and be supportive. And you might not be able to measure it, but it's tangible. It's just being in a space, the unity. And again, I think it's just the vulnerable energy. You benefit whether you talk or not. It's just, there's something about being in a space like that. Just even you and I being vulnerable right now, like there's strength in that, like even energetically and those spaces, however you can find them, whether it's a fitness group or a hiking group or friends or AA or Al-Anon. It's just, how can you find that energy and allow yourself to accept it?
Yeah. Be willing to attend. I think about that often. We make jokes with some of my friends around sauna chats, and we've tried to put audio and things in there while the sauna's cooking, when like you actually get the physiological sensation and the vulnerability that takes place, and especially the last like 7 minutes when it's like 200 degrees and you're cooking.
Oh yeah.
And a part of me is always like, man, like I just wish we could record all of these conversations and share them. Because I think about how many conversations like this happen and they just don't get shared. But then you pause for a moment and you're like, well, that's a new school idea in relation to these pocket computers in wanting to capture and share everything. Sometimes there is beauty in just having the experience and not sharing it.
Oh yeah.
And just being 100% in that present moment. And like you said, AA or the depth of conversations, to simply listen to somebody's story and meet them where they're at, as opposed to like trying to fix and trying to tinker or tell them that their feelings are wrong. Like everybody's feelings are valid. And I think that you're creating this very beautiful blend between hypnosis, therapy, meditation, storytelling. And I think you're taking all of these things that from the outside looking in are woo-woo. But if you actually look at them, we all experience them and maybe use slightly different language. And you're putting them all into a digestible smoothie for somebody then to consume, so they have the tools, whether they're a mom navigating high-level stress, a father feeling like he doesn't have an outlet for his stress, children trying to upgrade their operating system in the pursuit of becoming an adult, a high performer that, is experiencing the yips that maybe is trying to get back to being a high performer, somebody trying to become a high performer. I think you're onto something, and I look forward to seeing how you sharpen the sword and continue to refine the language and the structure, because that's the difficulty for an artist, right, is creating structure and scalability. And I don't know that I necessarily like those things, but it is necessary in the creation of long-term business.
It's the paradox of what I'm doing, what you're doing, what entrepreneurs are doing is, how do you scale this thing while also simplifying the message and the creative aspect of it? Mm-hmm. Because again, I get so passionate about this stuff. I can rant all day and just people's heads are spinning. So it's like condensing it, almost like doing a log line for a movie. Like, that's so tough for writers, because it's like, how do you take this huge idea and pare it down to one sentence? But then at the same time, how are we getting this out, and how are we going to help as many people as we can? It's the ratios thing, man. And it's like, the more you feel that you want to work on the creative, it's almost like, okay, that means you need to put some of that into the jug of the business side.
It's refinement too. It's also just what your hat says, man. Experience over explanation. We need to get people in the lab. We need to get people tinkering through talk therapy, through experiential hypnosis, through journaling, through the consistent practice of all of these different modalities. We need to create some case studies, and then we need to create some momentum to realize that this shit works. And then you can diffuse that into different demographics of people and gain feedback. And I think based on that feedback, we're going to gain some numerical values, which then aligns to your baseball background of like, this works, this is not the best, maybe we can enhance this, we can play with that. And it's like you said, the tinkering and playing of a little bit more ingredients, a little bit less ingredients. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, you have, a perfectly baked good.
But you have to have the vulnerability to tinker, right?
100%. And it's brutal in this world, man.
It's like because tinkering leads to failure at times, or perceived failure based on the process. But dude, you're like usual, you're spot on with it. And I could not believe more in sort of this next wave of creative hypnosis, meditation, all these things. And we've seen it kind of go from yoga, kind of going mainstream. And then, I think, Harvey Martin.
Yeah. So
like Harvey's the man, and his breathwork stuff and how it's sort of gotten mainstreamed into Major League Baseball and high-end athletics. Like, I truly know that this hypnosis stuff is going to be kind of the next wave of that self-improvement, going deep inside and, recalibrating. And the narrative recalibration, it's very intentional in that name, because it's not narrative re-storytelling or changing your narrative. Like, it's not, to have those internal shifts where people pick up on the change of your energy. It's just, man, just that much of a tinker. Just a recalibration.
Little more volume, little less, turning the dial just a little bit.
Does not need to be, coming out of this a completely different person trying to change everything. It's like with these little, like a sound engineer, just moving these knobs just a little bit, man. Yep. They can make all the difference. And
psychological DJ over here.
That's new subtitle on the
boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
I love it, man. Something that comes to mind, I think summarizes our conversation today, is that play is the highest form of learning.
For sure, man. Like, let's get back to playing, tinkering, and not worrying about what is going to come of it. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, if you could have spent the last year sitting here figuring out like what's going to be the best podcast, but what's going to make this the best podcast is you fucking podcasting.
Yeah.
And you're doing it, man. And it's been fun to watch. And, I say this to people sometimes, and it might come off weird, but I don't care. Like, I'm proud of you, man.
Appreciate
I'm proud of what you're doing. I'm proud of your mindset, and I'm proud of the what your journey is going to look like.
I appreciate it, man.
The fluidity of water. Like, I can't wait to see where you're at.
Thank you. I received that, and thanks for coming to play in the ALLSMITH Sandbox.
Dude, it's been great. Appreciate it.
Guys, if you enjoyed my conversation with Zack Parker, please rate, review, and subscribe. And as always, stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. Until next time.